Greetings, Marsh here, and welcome to episode 87 of my modded Factorio playthrough. In this episode, we are going to talk about all things stone processing and how to plan and implement that into our factory. Enjoy! Sometimes it's difficult to know exactly where to start when you have multiple processes. But for stone, how about we do the other stone sorting here that we have, where we take crushed stone and we get slag and some phosphorus. So in other words, it basically generates slag. And slag is more useful than crushed stone is. So if we could turn crushed stone back into slag and get some phosphorus out of it, that's a pretty good deal. Phosphorus isn't that particularly useful. Basically, it goes into phosphoric acid, which goes into fertilizer, which is something we're already doing. Or it goes into white phosphorus, which also goes into phosphoric acid. But we can add it to brass. There might be some of the mad clown ores that use phosphorus as well. This phosphorus line hasn't been running in a long time. It's basically just been sitting there, because we long ago stopped making fertilizer because we were just doing that to make gardens. And since we haven't needed to make any more gardens, that has been stationary. And I think we're also using it to consume some of that sulfur dioxide gas, which we already have something else to do with sulfur now, so that's not as much of a problem. But it is one of the acids, and it's also one of the stones, so we should probably handle that. And I'm kind of worried that stone processing is not going to fit in this space here, that it's going to butt up against a mine right here, which this alignment worked out pretty well. So I'm not sure where all the stone processing is going to go. It might actually go down here. We might turn everything around and have it go to the right and fill up this little space right here. Who knows? We'll just have to see how it works out. So we'll probably want to build each piece of this stone processing separately. Figure out what we want it to look like. Figure out how big it is. And then from there we can figure out where we want to place it. So what we're going to do is very similar to this. With the exception is here we were recapturing all of the slag and then grinding it back down and sending it back into these ore sorters. I don't think that's really necessary now, because I think we'd rather keep the slag as slag and take that benefit from transforming it out of crushed stone. So it's going to be a little different than this, but, you know, it's fairly straightforward. It's not a difficult process, so it might fit just fine right here. I mean, we could also put it on the bus here, the ore bus, but phosphorus ore is basically an acid, not a metal. So it's kind of weird to put it up there when it's just going to go wherever acid processing happens to be. Which I'm thinking will be somewhere down here, because that's where all the byproducts are, right here. So, the question is, what kind of ratio are we looking for, and how much phosphorus do we want? Lots of different ways to get it. Mad Clown's ways. But it probably makes more sense to handle that with the separate setup that handles all of the Mad Clown's ores, rather than kind of complicate this one. So let's just do the crushed stone sorting. So let's do a yellow belt and see what that looks like. 15. Well, that sounds like an awful lot. Yeah, 300 crushed stone. So instead, we should probably balance this based on input as opposed to output. And throughput probably won't be the same problem as it was before, because we have much faster inserters and belts now. There's nothing particularly clean about this ratio. Let's just do 3 machines. So it's going to take in 2 belts of crushed stone, put out a little less than 1 red belt of slag, and a tiny 3 phosphorus ore. We'll see if that works for us, and if it doesn't, well, we'll scale up or maybe do the Mad Clowns mining. But while we're thinking about phosphorus, might as well do the phosphorus processing too, which uses the white phosphorus instead of sulfuric acid, so that saves sulfur and it's more efficient with the phosphorus. So let's just grab that because we're going to need it. So we're going to have some belts moving around here where we need to have an input of the crushed stone, but then the slag needs to find its way all the way up here. Or we can just leave it as an output at the bottom here, and then just hook it up to wherever slag processing happens. Actually, since this is such a small process, we probably can just place it wherever makes sense in relation to the other stone processing. So let's talk about the theory of doing stone processing and how to set it up. So the way it's going to work is there's going to be a warehouse or something. It's probably going to be, I can't really see it now, but it's going to be a warehouse and it's going to be somewhere. And we're going to have a circuit network hook up to that warehouse. And the warehouse's fill level will determine what processes turn on and off. So our most important process will turn on when the warehouse is very low. So this is going to be inverted from this system here. So when we only have a tiny bit of resources, our most desired thing will turn on because we always want it to run. And then as the warehouse gets fuller and fuller, the less desired processes will turn on. And then eventually, all processes will be turned on and everything will be fine. But besides having priority, we also need to figure out a dump, because all byproducts need to have a dump, somewhere to go if you have too much of it. So when we look at all these processes we have, we'll also want to designate one of those processes as the dump. Where does everything go when there's no room for anything else? And we kind of have that set up here. It's not using a circuit network or anything, but if you look at this where we have stone going in and the slag's getting crushed if there's not enough crushed stone available. You know, it makes some bricks, it makes concrete, but these are all limited. So once these limits are filled, you know, it all stops, as it has here. But what doesn't stop? This machine right here making landfill, and we have 35,000 landfill. So this is the dump for stone. When there's nothing else for us to do with it, we make landfill. This isn't necessarily ideal, it's just how it's set up in this situation. So that's kind of an idea of how that works. So to calculate this, we're going to want to look at all of our byproducts and work our way down. Like some byproducts can be turned into other byproducts. So we want to start at the top. And the top in this situation is geodes. Do we have some geode technologies we can do? Looks like we haven't researched any of it yet. Well, one thing you can do with geodes is crush them down. You'll get crystal dust and more crushed stone. Then we can take it a step further, do geode processing too, where if we take 5 geodes and add some sulfuric acid, we'll get crystal slurry. But the amount of slurry we get depends on the geodes. Certain geodes are better at making slurry than others. So we have the option of using just the geodes, or crushing the geodes down into dust, and then turning all of that into slurry. And then we can send it through a filter, and turn that crystal slurry into crystal seedling. Or we can downgrade the quality of the product by taking it from crystal slurry down to mineral sludge. This also opens up the ability to make crystal catalysts, even though we don't really need those for anything right now. Let's see, any of these other things are worth looking at. Well, we can use the catalyst and the crystal seedling to make gemstones. But we don't really need the gemstones right now. So we don't need to really worry about that process. We'll We'll pipe that process in later when it makes more sense. We can't really build those yet because we're not processing aluminum or brass. And this is buried behind quite a bit of stuff, but another way of handling that crystal dust is to use those milling drums and lubricant and crush them down into powder, and then you can turn that powder into slurry. And that's useful for making splinters, which goes into modules and whatnot. But that's fairly down the list there. And this is locked by blue. So let's research this geode processing because we're going to need it. Let's hit both of them. So between these two methods, what's better? Adding sulfuric acid to geodes or adding sulfuric acid to crystal dust, which is crushed geodes? Well, let's go in here. So let's start a new one. Let's say we'll make crystal slurry from crystal dust. Then we're going to supply the crystal dust with equal amounts of each one of these geodes. Let's just say, 15 per second of each, just so we have even numbers here. Which creates our 450 crystal slurry. And since we don't actually need the seedlings for anything, we can just downgrade this to mineral sludge. So this requires a whole bunch of mineralized water and some sulfuric acid. Well, we've got crushed stone. Which we can turn into mineralized water. So to make our 900, we need 90 crushed stone. And we produce 90 crushed stone. So in the end, we have 15 of each geode and 135 acid, which creates 450 mineral sludge and some sulfuric wastewater, which we can gather the sulfur from. So let's do the other method, where we take each geode independently and we turn that into the slurry. And then we'll process that slurry into mineral sludge. So processing the geodes directly does have a higher yield, where it gives you 630 mineral sludge compared to 450. But it requires 270 sulfuric acid compared to just 135. And it also requires a huge amount of mineralized water. Just out of curiosity, that's 126 crushed stone per second, which that sounds like a huge consumer of crushed stone. Perhaps if we had an overload of crushed stone, this system would work. But you have to remember that these are essentially byproducts that we're just trying to get rid of. And using byproducts to get rid of other byproducts seems a little fishy. Because this would require us to have both way more sulfuric acid and a bunch of crushed stone. Also more coal filters too. So one of them might be better than the other. Like from a purely efficiency standpoint, you might get more output by processing each geode independently. But I think I'd rather just make the dust, because the dust actually goes into things. It goes into crystal seeds, and the finer dust here, the crystal powder, which goes into other things. Where just straight up geodes don't actually go into anything besides just the slurry. So from a logistical standpoint, it probably makes more sense to process them all and crush them down. So we'll go with this method here. But we have a known amount of geodes coming in, so we can set this to match our input. It looks like each block creates 7.5 geodes, and they all produce their own color. So we need these numbers to be 7.5. And that's pretty convenient, where we have just about 2 crushers for each geode type. And that'll create 45 crystal dust, which we then need to add sulfuric acid to get our crystal slurry, and that's a nice convenient 6 liquefiers. And then 9 filtration units, so those are all nice even numbers. And that's basically all we have to do with geodes for now. Later on, when we have more uses for this crystal dust, or for this slurry, we'll just have to pipe it off of this system and send it elsewhere. So let's build the blueprint for this. So first we need our 12 ore crushers. There we go. And let's do it right here. We can do an ore crusher on one side. And because these are 7.5, it means a yellow belt will work fine for an input for both sides. And then we can have the output on the other side. So let's say that one handles blue, that one handles purple. And we need the inserter numbers. So it looks like 1 stack inserter going in and 2 going out. And it appears like it expands because 15 are going in. It actually looks pretty close to 30 for an output. 3.8 plus 7.5 plus 7.5 plus 11.3. 30 exactly. Well, close. Good enough. Let's see, I kind of want to put all of these crushers, since it only takes 2 of them. I kind of want to put them all on the same side here. Our output is on this side. Input is on this side. 1 stack inserter going in. And 2 going out. In some of these situations, it looks like the 2 stack inserters will just barely work. So this might not be the most balanced of setups, but I don't think it really needs to be. So we have our inputs. Then we need our long-handed outputs. And that will take 1 yellow belt and fill up 1 red belt. So we can kind of do the same thing on the other side. Set this to yellow. Into green. And let's do the math again. Make sure we're not overloading the output belt. 7.5 plus 3.8 plus 11.3 plus 7.5. Because all these things put out kind of differing amounts of outputs. So that also adds up to 30.1. I'll just put that there to show that's the input. So that's looking good. And now we need to do the last 2. Which we can pick these up and flip them over. Fortunately, this part isn't going to look very symmetrical, but it is what it is. So now we need to split off the crystal dust from the crushed stone. So we need 2 red belts of each as an output. Let's see, let's do the crushed stone and do that on the outside. So the inside is just going to be the dust. And then we'll have to send this crushed stone elsewhere. It's hard to say exactly what direction it would go, but you know, something like that, or the other way, or whatever it needs to do. And then the one from over here can be matched up as well. So we'll get that set up. When this is placed and we know where everything's going to be. We also kind of need to have an input for all of these as well, because these geodes need to be sorted and sent along the right belts. Well, let's just line it up right here, because that's the doubles, and it lines up just fine. That'll place some geodes on one side and some on the other, but I noticed a flaw here, that when the geodes aren't picked up by this machine and they go by, they'll be stuck down here. Yeah, because of that, these might have to just be on their own belts just to avoid that problem. It's kind of too tightly packed here to have an alternative. So it'll be wide, but it will be more symmetrical looking. A little better. And then it's just one colored belt going into each. Oops, but that's the wrong side here. And wrong belt color. And all of this needs to come out of one warehouse. See, just trying to make it look as straight as possible. Something like this, so all of them are on one side. There we go. So we need to set these up for the individual colors. But it would be nice to have a high-level alarm on here as well. And we can kind of do that with a simple circuit here. So we'll need a combinator. We need a light, constant combinator to set its color, and a speaker to make some noise. And some power. Probably should put some lights in here too. So let's put some sample signals in here. Let's say we've got a bunch of different stuff, different geodes. Let's say that's a geode, that's a geode, that's a geode, that's a geode. Well, we want to see what the total capacity of this is, not what the capacity is of each individual geode, because what we care about is the warehouse full or is it not full? We don't really care what the colors are because we're not using the individual colors for anything. So we'll send a signal into an arithmetic combinator and do each, which means it will calculate whatever we want it to do on each input signal. And we'll say multiply by 1, so it's not going to do anything to each signal. But we can do an output of whatever we want. So let's just say A. So what it's going to do is convert each signal into an A signal. So you see here how the input signals are all of those individual things, but the output is just 1.3K of A. So it has basically deleted the identities of all of these resources, and they're just counting them as individual items. And it's a little broken for this situation because these all stack in different quantities. But geodes stack in the same quantity, so it doesn't matter. And then we can take that signal and power a speaker and power a light with it. And additionally, I want to set this light to be red. So what is the high level alarm here? I guess that depends on how geodes stack. They stack in 200. So same as ore. So let's do 90,000. If A is greater than 90,000, turn on the high level alarm. And use colors so they're red. And we can do the same thing with the speaker. If A is greater 90,000, calm down. It always gets you the first time. And then we'll just set it to that one, because it's annoying. And it'll do an alert. And let's just like the geode. Geode warehouse above 90%. And we can kind of test this just by setting this to like 0. So it works. You can kind of do the same thing with the light. We don't need the complex signal generators like the ore had, but that's kind of how that works. And yeah, that's kind of covered up a little bit, but I suppose if that was not quite in the same spot, it might be a little easier to read. There we go. A little easier to see. Take all our junk out, and now it's not sending a signal. So our warehouse is going to produce 1.5 red belts, or just 2 red belts, so we can have 2 inputs right there to power this. And they'll go wherever they need to go. Okay. So like before, we'll worry about stitching in the crushed stone based on whatever direction it needs to go, either to the left or to the right. So no reason to do that right now. So the next step here is going into 6 liquefiers and a stack inserter for each. We can also combine all these belts down to 2. For the purposes of belts, it might be a lot easier just to have a warehouse here instead of this, just to make it look nice and clean. And really, having warehouses and loaders are fantastic for keeping your throughput balanced. Doesn't really matter how many squares up it is, but we've got something like this. And everything going into a warehouse. Just put a light there. And then we need our 2 outputs, which we can set to crystal dust. So using these loaders like this works a lot better when you have a very small variety of resources, because they do have limits on the filters. So if you have more than 5 items that have to go through here, this gets kind of complicated. It's why I didn't do something like this for the ore sorting, just because we have, you know, like 10 ores going through here. It's just too many ores, too complicated, and doing this, sorry you can't see, but doing this belt business here was just an easier solution for that problem. But this is on a smaller scale, so we should be able to use loaders just fine. And we can set this down because this isn't being used as a storage warehouse. It's just being used as a balancer, so we can just limit that. So how's the factory looking like for resources? It's actually pretty much caught up. Let's turn on some research here. Let's just keep doing intermediate reach. And we have 37,000 copper. So we definitely want to burn through that. We have 6 of these, but we have 2 belts. So we can just do 3 on each side. But because these liquefiers have an input and an output of liquids, means we have to be really careful about how we place them. Like, we can't just put 2 of them together, because then both of these sides are going to need to be connected. And it's going to leave, and you know, those need to be connected too, so there's going to be no room for inserters. So if we wanted to do it that way, they'd have to be long-handed inserters, which isn't necessarily a problem. We can do it that way. Let's just space them apart so they look symmetrical. So we'll do crystal slurry. long-handed stack inserter for each input. Like put a light right there, and a light right there. Here, let's do it on the other side. That seems pretty good. Fairly compacted. And we'll leave this end open, so if that crystal dust needs to be taken somewhere else, we can just continue down the line, or create a circuit condition here if we need to, or have more belts coming in through here that aren't being picked up at all. So we have multiple options with that. So pick this up, and then flip it, put it on the other side. Let's hook up the acid. And the slurry can move forward. Connect it on each side there. Now we need our 9 filtration units, but we also need to be making filter frames. So how many assemblers is that? 1.2. And we'll need to get some coal over there. It's probably not going to use coal very quickly, yeah. 1 per second at maximum speed, so that's an easy job for a drone, since that's low throughput. But 9 is an odd number, and let's just do 10 so it's even. Using lots of steel pipes for these, so it might be easier just to pick up some steel pipes. Whoa! Look at that, we're full on sulfuric acid. Battery production has stopped, so we've made the last 1,000 accumulators. Look at that. We actually have a supply of sulfur now. So the factory has as much sulfur as it can possibly need. Fantastic. I suppose I can keep making more batteries, but I think we're pretty good here. There's probably not a particularly good way of doing this symmetrically, but we could try. Well, one thing we need to consider is if these belts do end up passing through to go somewhere else, which they probably will at some point, we can't use that space in the middle for these filtration units, because that space needs to be reserved for a future purpose. So we'll probably have to space these out a little bit. So we have 3 choices here. Slag slurry to mineral sludge, crystal slurry to mineral sludge, and crystal slurry to seedlings. But in this situation, since we don't really have any use for these right now, we're just getting rid of them, let's downgrade it to mineral sludge. So this is going to require mineralized water as an input, and the output will be mineral sludge and sulfuric wastewater. So this is going to change how our factory works, because right now our factory is consuming all available mineralized water. But this is actually something where we need to hold on to mineralized water, and in the event that we don't have enough mineralized water, we're going to need to produce more. So this is going to require a couple changes to how mineralized water is handled. We can do this. Link that into there, and then that can go up. I want to put that there too. And then we have an output, which we're going to need to handle. And processing this sulfuric wastewater will produce a little bit of mineralized water. Then we need our 2 belts. Belts going up, belts going down. How quickly are these using frames per second? Quite slow. So we can use a length changing inserter to handle this. So we'll do a short-handed pickup, long-handed drop to get it in, and then long-handed for both to drop off the filter. And let's see, hopefully if we put the power pole right there, it will cover both sides. And we can squish everything real close together. No real room for lights, so we might have to run some in the middle or something, but that seems pretty good. So let's set this to nearsighted. Then copy the whole thing again. And copy it one more time to get 5. Okay. Then copy the whole thing again. But for the other side. Might have to change how these belts work a little bit. Actually, the inputs will probably be coming from up here. And the outputs will go up. And the directions are fixed going this way. And there's 2 spaces in the middle in case these belts need to keep moving. And I'll just put 2 belts right in the middle there to mark as that's what that space is there for. We need some lights now. Luckily, these power poles reach. I don't know if that's going to be enough light for this, but we'll have to see at night. Okay, now we need to get all these sides hooked up. Looks like that's pretty good. We have 3 different resources we need to deal with. Mineralized water, sulfuric wastewater, and that mineral sludge. So how much water purification are we going to need to do for this? 180. Which is 1.2 hydro plants. It's going to produce a little bit of mineralized water, which we can probably pipe somewhere for efficiency. So that means this is going to have a slight output of crushed stone. Let's see, we're going to have belts coming in through here, so we probably don't want to build the stuff right there. So let's just build it on the side. We can just put it wherever and then figure out the spacing. Looks pretty good, and then we're going to have a small output of sulfur. And let's see where to place this. Well, let's figure out the coal filters first. So we're going to have a machine making coal filters. It looks like yellow will barely be fast enough. Although we'll probably want to space this in such a way to where we have a nice buffer. And how that works is going to be different on each side. Something like this. Let's just line it up with this guy right here. And we'll need to get coal in there somehow. That'll be pretty straightforward, and we'll figure out where those belts should go once coal's piped in. Let's tuck the water treatment plant in here, because hopefully we can line it up with the output. It is going to require us changing a few things here. But let's see, we can line it up. Something like that. Get rid of the inserters on that side. So then the water goes in there, then we need to hook up the left and the right sides. Let's just go around the top here. We need to be able to handle an excess of sulfur. That if we don't need the sulfur, we need to be able to get rid of the sulfuric wastewater. So we can go back here. So it also requires 2 clarifiers, which we could probably stick on the other side here. And it'd be nice to have an inline tank as well. Let's see, we can line it up. Put an inline tank in there. An overflow valve. And connect it. Because these water washers have something very similar to where we have provisions for if mineralized water gets too full, it gets taken care of here. And this is for if the sulfuric wastewater gets too full. Basically, it's just less stuff moving around your pipes if you can just take care of the excess resources near where you've produced them rather than centralizing everything and having lots of logistics problems. This still doesn't have anything to handle the saline water, which is just being taken care of by this single clarifier right here. But we'll deal with that later. But this whole system isn't really going to produce all that much mineralized water per second. And in fact, it's actually going to consume mineralized water. The thing that we're going to create a small excess of is actually stone. Okay, so to create the necessary mineralized water for this system, we need 2 liquefiers and a whole bunch of inserters. Basically 3 per machine. Let's throw them on the left since there's a little bit more space. Let's move that light to the other side. So we need 2 belts worth of output. Well, that had to be there. Although I might want to move this up square. Let's just do it out here. We need to place this in here. How about right there? We'll have some outputs right there. Set these to just crushed stone. Let them always run. And then we can hook up the mineralized water to this system. But we only want this to run if the quantity of mineralized water gets too low. So let's grab a storage tank and a top-up valve. So we'll top up the tank if it gets too low, otherwise it will try to let the rest of the factory and these water purifiers handle it. And then we'll just need to find somewhere to put this purified water. To remind me that that's a thing, I'll put that little end on there. Let's see, we need to get the sulfur somewhere as well. Just all depends on exactly where it goes. But it's pretty easy to handle. Something like that. So that handles the mineralized water side, and that handles the sulfuric acid. And we've already got the crystal slurry going in. We're going to worry about getting the coal in here later, but to remind me, I'll just put a belt in there. So now we just are stuck with our output of the mineral sludge. And that is the output we desired for this setup. The reason why we're stopping here is because that's not the only way to make mineral sludge. We can also make it from slag slurry, which itself can be made from slag and sulfuric acid, or stone and sulfuric acid. So since those 3 processes need to be combined before we worry about what happens next, we'll just end it with this part of the setup. And we might have buffer tanks and whatnot in there. It's not too big, and it's fairly squarish, so it should fit in somewhere pretty nicely. And actually, I will put a belt right here as well to remind myself this is actually going to produce a slight amount of crushed stone, so it's going to need to have somewhere to go. So that's why that belt is there. So we have a couple things we're going to have to stitch into this to make it work. So unfortunately, without acid, none of this is going to operate properly. But there are warehouses which will suck up and absorb and crush a little of those geodes, so at least it'll be partially functional. So let's find a home for it. But that's going to have to wait till the next episode. Thanks for watching, and I will see you later.